Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our seminar on social media, hate speech, how does discrimination spread through algorithms. This is a part of the project we jointly conduct with the Swedish Consulate General, the project on identifying hate speech through the AI. We're joined by Susan Benesh, the Dangerous Speech Project Founder Director, and our moderator will be Yasemin Inceoğlu, who will be talking about how to deal with hate speech in social media, what technologies are behind it, what are the roles played by various actors involved in this, and what responsibilities do they have. I would like to hand the microphone over to Yasemin Inceoğlu, our moderator, and I'd like to welcome you all again. Yasemin Hanım, it's over to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to welcome all the participants and thank dear Professor Susan Benesh for being with us this evening time in Turkey, in United States. I think it's something like early afternoon. I will be moderating our online talk titled Social Media and Hate Speech. How does discrimination spread through algorithms, where we'll be discussing hate speech on social media. Let me first introduce Susan Benesh, the founding director of Dangerous Speech Project, to you briefly. Susan is a faculty associate of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University, and she teaches human rights at the American University School of International Service. And she started out as a journalist, covering many subjects, including wars and severe human rights violations in several countries. She also gave a speech in 2015 in a panel discussion on dangerous speech, which was held at Hrant Dink Foundation, where I first met her. From then, we know that she prefers to use dangerous speech instead of hate speech. And I remember her stating that some types of discourse cannot be always covered by the notion of hate speech, since the categories, boundaries are hard to define and are often subjective, whereas dangerous speech is a smaller, more clearly bounded category. Now, I will go on by saying a few words in order to frame our online talk. As you know, discriminating hateful speech online, often targeting specific groups and minorities, has become a big problem in societies, and the production and dissemination of online hate speech have increased since half of the world's population uses social media, and the source of reliability of information have become more ambiguous. And hateful speech potentially creates enmities, silences debates, and marginalizes individuals and groups from participation online. And what is challenging is that hate speech now refers to a variety of speech acts and other ill behaviors taking place online, ranging from penal criminal acts to speech that is uncivil and disturbing and yet tolerated. And this definitional difficulty is further complicated by claims that any limitations on hate speech endanger people's right to freedom of expression. And despite the ambiguity of and political debates surrounding the term itself, hate speech has also been discussed as a technological problem. On the one hand, it is a problem because social media platforms and their algorithms help generate hateful and intolerant communication and its wide reach in society, while on the other, machine learning developers and researchers find it challenging to identify and thus monitor hateful content online. And hate speech detection is part of the ongoing effort against the oppressive and abusive language on social media, using this complex algorithms to flag racist and violent speech faster and better than human beings alone. But machine learning models are prone to learning human-like biases from the training data that feeds these algorithms. And it's very easy for the existing bias in our society to be transferred to algorithms. And we see discrimination against race and gender easily perpetrated in machine learning. And algorithm-based differentiations become discriminatory if they lead to unjustified disadvantaging of persons with legally protected characteristics, in particular age, gender, ethnic origin, religion, sexual orientation, sexual identity, or disability. And companies like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube hold huge influence over our ability to exercise on our human rights online through the application of content rules, which determine what can and cannot be shared on their platforms. And however, these rules are often vague and broad, and their application is inconsistent and biased. And this means a large amount of content is wrongly removed or wrongly kept online, affecting our right to freedom of expression and ability to be part of public debate and speak out on the issues that matter to us. And too often, these wrongful removals affect those already experiencing discrimination and silencing, including this ethnic minority groups, women, LGBTIQ people, as well as the human rights defenders and journalists. So our goal in this panel is to discuss the distribution of fake news, hate speech, dangerous speech, and discriminative speech on social media platforms, and how the big technology companies like Facebook, Twitter, Google are struggling with the spread of hate speech on their platforms, if this effort is enough or not, how our existing algorithms opt to fuel discrimination and polarization, and what are the roles of government, civic society, and academics in addressing hate speech on social media. How can free expression be protected while combating hate speech? Now, I am going to give the floor to Susan Benesh by forwarding my first question. Again, welcome, Professor Benesh. So happy to be with you, and your contribution is highly appreciated. I would like to say this also on behalf of the foundation. And Susan, you know that spread of discriminatory language, hate speech, and fake news on social media is growing each day, every day. So what do you think about this situation? Could you please give us an overview of hate speech on social media? What is alarming regarding that, and what is getting better? Can we be optimistic, or should we be pessimistic on all these? Thank you.
First of all, I want to very warmly thank the Ranting Foundation for inviting me to take part. I am a long-standing admirer of the foundation and its work, and the people, including Yasemin, who are associated with it. Second, I want to apologize. I have a little, we say frog in my throat, a little cold, so my voice sounds funny, but I am fine, and I don't have COVID, and I promise I will speak as nicely as I can. And then third, Yasemin has already given us such an eloquent and thoughtful and comprehensive introduction to the subject that there, in some ways, I think there isn't so much left for me to say, but I will do my best. Regarding the increase in hate speech, first, as Yasemin has so well pointed out, it's difficult to get a clear and consensus understanding of what hate speech is. In practice, it's a broad term that covers. We can think about a very large spectrum of human expression, from some comments that are insulting, diminishing to other humans, but not likely to do more than upset the people they purport to describe and those who sympathize with them. That spectrum could continue, though, all the way to what I call dangerous speech, which is any kind of human expression that has the capacity to inspire violence against members of another human group. We have all too many examples of that, as the social media companies call it, content. That just means some sort of human expression, of communication, that steadily, incrementally changes people's minds and then eventually their behavior, so that they commit unspeakable acts. We know that this is the case. And of course, this content circulates much more quickly and more widely online than it did before social media existed. To answer your question, and to try to give us a way to understand and analyze this rather broad topic, which is hate speech spreading virally around the internet and other forms of digital communication like direct messaging apps, which we should surely include as we think about this. It's worth thinking about the different sorts of content. I've already echoed Yasemin in pointing out that there's really a very wide range of types of hate speech and levels of severity. This is something that the social media companies have only begun to think about. Facebook, for example, tested tiers of hate speech, 3 different tiers that were meant to indicate levels of severity. So that's a relatively new idea. They haven't done much work on that with algorithms or AI, but it's quite interesting. A second way in which it's really worth dividing up hate speech to think about it more precisely and more usefully is to think about the people who are producing it. And there, I'd like to suggest a little taxonomy, some categories. First of all, we can think about the people we might call the professionals. Those are people who, for reasons of ideology or very often financial gain, but in any case, reasons of self-interest, are producing and very widely disseminating hate speech online. They do it with great skill, unfortunately, and with a lot of dedication. They are sometimes working for private actors. They are all too often employed by governments. We know of a great many governments around the world that operate what are sometimes informally called troll farms. That is to say, small armies of people who sometimes in turn create what are called bots. A bot, from the word robot, is a little piece of code, of software, if you like, that impersonates a human, that addresses itself to people online as if it were a human. And of course, the advantage of using bots is that you can disseminate any kind of content at a gigantic scale, much faster and much more than you can simply using people, even if you have a large number of people. So these troll farms and the bots that they deploy have, unfortunately, an enormous influence. They are usually deployed, they are aimed at specific audiences with specific purposes. For example, to turn one group of people violently against another group of people, or to convince people that they face an existential threat at the hands of someone else. For example, with a view to getting the audience to vote a particular way in an election. As you surely know, there has been great anxiety in the United States about the use of such professional operations to disseminate hate speech and also false information in order to influence an election. And of course, this is not only the case in the United States. I also here would like to point out that all too often there is a significant and powerful overlap between what we call hate speech and what we call disinformation or fake news. Lots and lots of hate speech, as you might imagine, is false. This can itself have very dangerous consequences. But I promised you more than one category of people who are disseminating hate speech. So first we have the professionals, about whom I've already talked a little bit. Then I would say we have the dedicated amateurs. These are people who, for one reason or another, become personally fixated on what they perceive as a terrible threat posed by another group of people, or they're fixated on what they see as the evil nature of another group of people, so that they want to attack them, they want revenge, they want to hurt those people. And those amateurs, who are sometimes seen in my own country using a folkloric archetype, we call them the troll in his mother's basement. So this archetype, who unfortunately is real, but doesn't capture all of the sorts of people who do this, of course. But the figure we have in our minds is usually a young man who hasn't bathed in a while, who is sitting in front of a screen, maybe 20 hours a day, and prototypically we say the troll in his mother's basement, because for some reason this guy is living in the basement of his mother. Why it's not his father's basement, I can't tell you. And usually in the kind of popular imagination, he's eating some kind of terrible junk food. In any case, I try to recount this to you in a humorous way, but of course, it's often not funny at all. These people go after other groups of people and sometimes also target individuals. For example, women, often to terrible effect. And some of them, as we know, also take it upon themselves to take up arms and to commit massacres. For example, unfortunately, my country is as you know, famous for that. So some of these individual trolls inspire others to commit terrible acts. And then I would offer you a third category. One other thing is that those trolls find each other online, and this is one of the enormous changes that the internet and particularly social media have brought about, which is that people who never would have found each other in the past can now find each other quite easily, often for wonderful reasons. They want to play chess together, for example, even though they live many, many thousands of kilometers apart, but also people who are very lonely and angry and disaffected can find each other very easily, and then they redouble and multiply each other's anger and each other's dedication to producing hate speech often. Then I want finally to offer you a third category, and those I would call, to use a very idiomatic English phrase, bandwagon jumpers. We talk about people who jump on a bandwagon in a parade when there's in a traditional parade, there's a wagon going along with musicians playing, and some people in the crowd get excited and they jump on board. So online, those would be the people who see terrible content circulating and become inspired and disseminate it themselves or share it themselves, even though they are not normally dedicated to this. And we see this, in fact, in the results of some very good research that has tried to document the increase in hate speech to which Jessamine referred. In fact, what is easier to document than an overall steady increase is sudden spurts, sudden, if you like, geysers of hate speech that happen often in response to a particular offline event that makes a particular sort of people angry. And then there can be an extremely sudden increase, and then after a while, a decrease again until the next spurt. So these are just a few notes on what I see. Of course, hate speech is an ocean or several oceans, and it also takes many different forms in different social and political contexts. But I've talked a long time, so I'll stop and await the next question.
Thank you so much. And Susan, do you observe a trend, a pattern in the spread of hate speech on social media, such as hate speech targets? You can give examples from United States of America, such as ethnic, religious, national, and sexual identities.
Absolutely. All of the targets you mentioned are unfortunately subject to torrents of hate speech. I would mention at least two specific features of that. One is that often they overlap. So some of the people I described before, who are quite dedicated to producing and disseminating hate speech, are angry at more than one target group. In fact, Sometimes it's even a bit bewildering. To give you one example, the man who committed a massacre in a synagogue in Pittsburgh about 2 years ago posted just before he did it, posts in which he was attacking both Muslims and Jews at the same time. Mm-hmm. So I thought, finally, Muslims and Jews are united in something. Very tragically, it was, the rage of this guy. Women are very often attacked, and as I'm sure you know, also women journalists. In other words, particular forms of identity can overlap to make a subgroup especially vulnerable. So women are often attacked, and journalists are often attacked. And the people who are producing hate speech despise those two particular groups sometimes. And then when there is an overlap in the identity of a person or people, such as women journalists, then that a joint identity makes a person, even a person or a group, even more vulnerable. And then the other note I wanted to offer is that, for better and for worse, those, particularly the second category I mentioned, the amateur but very dedicated producers of hate speech, are often quite ignorant. Mm-hmm. So they think they're attacking Muslims, but they go after Sikhs, as an example, because Sikhs wear turbans. Mm-hmm. And these people think that Muslims wear turbans, and therefore, you can see. So we find sometimes rather peculiar misdirections, actually, of hate speech, which unfortunately is equally damaging sometimes, especially where it inspires violence and discrimination offline.
Yeah, thank you. And let's now talk about a bit social media policies, Susan. The social media policies against hate speech and other types of discrimination. As we have mentioned, big technology companies such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Google, they have started to develop various policies. You also mentioned what Facebook is doing very recently to combat the spread of hate speech and fake news on their platforms. How do you evaluate these efforts? And what do you think about these policies in preventing the spread of hate speech and harmful speech or dangerous speech online?
Yes. Well, I'm smiling because I am a longstanding critic of the companies and of their efforts. However, they have also sometimes invited me and my colleagues to come and offer some ideas and advice. So I have this kind of double role of official grump and critic, and then also sometimes arriving grumpily to answer specific questions, because I will say, to be fair, that 5, 7, 8 years ago, the companies were not nearly as interested in doing something about this problem, or I would really call it a set of problems, since hate speech is not one thing, and it manifests, as I've been suggesting, in lots of different ways. But in any case, the companies were not so interested in this just a few years ago, and now they are much more interested in it. And that's for at least two reasons. One is they have been subjected to quite a bit of pressure from outside, from governments that have passed laws to try to force the companies to do more to limit the spread of hate speech, on the platforms, um, um, general complaining from people who are severely attacked on those platforms, and also people who are interested in it or studying it, like me. The companies are also at the moment fearing that they will be forced much more vigorously by legislation, and even by supranational efforts like in the EU, the European Union. So they are paying, let's say they have been obliged to pay more attention. A second reason, though, which is only fair to say, is that they do have quite a few people on their staffs by now who really do care about this and are trying to do something. I cannot speak that way about the leadership of the companies, in part because I don't hang out with them, you know. Let's say I don't know what the directors of the companies really want, but over the years I have become familiar with some of the people who work at the companies. They have also made some effort to hire quite a lot of people who are not American. So 7 or 8 years ago, I would have said, this is a small group of young people in California who are trying to make decisions for the whole world. That's terrifying, or it should be terrifying. Excuse me. Now they have brought quite a lot of people from other parts of the world to California. And they also have offices in many parts of the world. This allows them to at least do a somewhat better job of understanding what is going on in other parts of the world, which, by the way, is where the enormous majority of their users are. I am often frustrated by the fact that even now, much of the policy conversations at the companies focus on the United States and similar countries, even though they know well that 85% at least of their users are outside the United States and Europe. So they have made, what I want to say is that they have made, in general, some progress in specific policies and in generally paying attention to the topic, but there's a lot more progress to be made. Shall I speak a bit specifically about those policies as well?
Yes, please do.
Okay. First of all, let's think a moment about what to do about hate speech. The simplest answer is to delete it. And the enormous majority of the policy conversation has focused on that option for a long time. It is, in my view, totally insufficient. It's not possible to take down the content faster than especially the professionals using bots can put it back up. So trying to delete all the hate speech is sometimes referred to as a game of whack-a-mole. This is a game at carnivals and festivals that you may have seen. It's there's a big board with a bunch of holes in it, and the person working there gives you a hammer, and little creatures keep popping up out of those holes, and you're supposed to smash them down with a hammer as fast as you can. And if you I don't know, smash them all successfully, then you win some prize. And of course, the point is you can't win. They're supposed to be moles. It's an animal that lives in the ground. You know, the little thingies keep popping up much more quickly than you can smash them down. And that is the case, undoubtedly, with hate speech online. The only way really to solve this problem is to decrease the rate at which that stuff is appearing in the first place. I have to recognize that there is another potential technological solution, which is to delete the content even before it appears. The companies already have tools for this. for example, to prevent violations of copyright law. If I try to post a photograph or some other material for which someone else owns the copyright, and the company's algorithm detects that, then it will prevent me from posting this material in the first place. They could conceivably do that for hate speech. I think it's an absolutely terrible idea for the reason that Yasemin mentioned, which is that there are huge implications for freedom of expression. With any effort to suppress hate speech, if content is deleted even before it appears, it is true that if the algorithms select the right content, then harm will be forestalled. No one will get to see that content, and any harm that might have been brought about won't happen. On the other hand, and this is, if you take away one point from everything I say, let it please be this: we have no idea what the algorithms of the companies are and are not identifying as hate speech. They are saying that now the vast majority of the content that they identify as hate speech and eventually take down or respond to in some other way is detected automatically, is detected by algorithms. This should make us extremely interested in how those algorithms are functioning and what they are actually detecting, where they are drawing the line between content that is, as the companies put it, actionable. That means they're going to do something about it. And content that is not actionable. That means they will leave it alone. The companies have strongly resisted, of course, sharing information, tangible, concrete information about how their algorithms function. First, because those are, that's their professional secret. That's their proprietary information as a business. They of course also say that a major reason why they don't want to share the information is that if they did that, they feel that then the bad people who are disseminating hate speech would be able to do it much more effectively, because they would know exactly where the company is drawing the line, and they would therefore be able to produce information that is almost crossing the line, but not quite. I'm frankly not convinced by that argument. If we were to think about law draws many lines all the time between behavior that is acceptable and behavior that is unlawful. Laws are, of course, published so that all of us can know where the lines are drawn. And that does allow for people to act in ways that are nearly unlawful, but not quite. The answer, it seems to me, to that is, if you don't like that, then you should move the line. Then the rule or the law needs to be changed. It is not bad for the companies to be transparent about their algorithms. On the contrary, in my view, it's absolutely essential so that our freedom of expression, and when I say ours, after all, I'm talking about billions of people for whom social media are now a very important, if not principal means of communication, so that our freedom of expression can be protected not only by the people who work for the companies. Even though, as I said, the companies have now hired a larger variety of people, it is still, in my view, crazy and dangerous for them to have exclusive control over what we do get to disseminate and what we also get to see and hear, and on the other hand, what we don't get to hear.
Yeah. We were talking about the social media companies. They utilize artificial intelligence to detect and prevent hate speech on their platforms. What do you think about this new advancement? Don't you have anything positive
Yes,
on it?
absolutely.
Yeah. Just
First
would
of
you
all,
like to review the advantages and maybe,
sure,
of course, disadvantages we know, but there might be
absolutely.
advantages of detecting these. Yeah.
Unquestionably, first of all, there are only two ways of attempting to detect hate speech online. Algorithms, or AI, in other words, software, as the computer scientists call it, computational means, automatic means. That's one. A machine does it. What's the other one? People. So the companies have also, as I said, 7 or 8 years ago, they weren't so interested in this problem. They didn't work so hard on it, and they didn't have that many people working on it. By now, they have literally tens of thousands of people who are underpaid subcontractors who sit in front of screens all day long, looking at utterly horrifying content. The companies have hired psychologists to try to help these very often young, vulnerable people with the tremendous psychological harm that is brought about by, for example, watching beheading videos and other unspeakable content. They are being bombarded by terrible content all of the time. They are under enormous pressure to make quick, accurate decisions, whether to leave it up or whether to take it down. It is a miserable and undoubtedly damaging job. So that's the first reason, it seems to me, to be at least very much interested in the possibility of using AI to detect hate speech and, by the way, other forms of harmful content. The second one is that even though the companies have hired, as I said, literally thousands and thousands of people, the scale of all of this is so gigantic that you couldn't really hire enough people to do it without at least using algorithms and AI for some part of the process. What many of the companies are doing now, they say, although I want to note also that we are relying on them for the information that we have about what they are doing. And as the recent revelations of Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, reminded us, the companies certainly don't always tell the truth about what they're doing. In any case, they claim that for now they are relying on AI, or automated means, for what they call surfacing hate speech, possible hate speech, if you like, that is then supposed to be reviewed by humans who then make the final decisions. This apparently saves time for the humans. It gives them a kind of, if you can imagine, like an automated filter that then dumps some kind of sludge, in the laps of those humans who then review it. I still am, of course, as a human being, deeply concerned about all of those people whose job it is to look at such awful content and make those awful decisions. Surely for that reason alone, we would love all of this to be done by AI, by automated means.
Mm-hmm. And detection and prevention studies should be considered in accordance with human rights. It would be crucial to discuss them in relation to ethical concerns. And Susan, in your opinion, what are the ethical concerns in detecting and preventing hate speech? What are the ethical concerns regarding AI and hate speech studies? What are the options for regulating AI systems in real world settings? What are the advantages of ex ante and ex post monitoring? I mean, I'm just asking you as a whole, just you can.
Absolutely. It's such a vital question.
And there are heated debates whether algorithms are biased against specific identities. What do you think about whether the algorithms are biased in terms of different identities, such as ethnic, religious, gender identity, etc.? Thank you.
Absolutely. The first thing is, if you ask whether algorithms are biased, I will have to ask you, which algorithms? Each one of them is different. They are built by different people in somewhat different ways. What is so striking and to me so worrisome is that I can't answer that question for any algorithm currently in use by any social media company, since they keep them secret. There was a very interesting experiment a few years ago by Jigsaw, which is the research arm of Google. They produced an algorithm to try to detect what they described as impolite content, or content that would make someone want to leave a conversation. They built this this API or algorithm by first asking humans, known by the way informally as mechanical Turks. These are people who are willing to do some work in front of a screen, in exchange, of course, for pay. They get recruited in large numbers. And in this case, they were asked to look at large amounts of content from the New York Times and from Wikipedia, principally, and code that content. In other words, say whether, of course, in writing, whether this content was something that would make them want to leave the conversation. They were also asked other specific questions. Was it impolite in their view? And on this basis, after getting individual people to code hundreds of thousands of individual, bits of content, the Jigsaw team built what they called the Perspective API. That's the name they gave it. And they did something extremely unusual, which was to make it available for outsiders, including researchers, to test it, to try it out. So, of course, instantly, lots of people like me, got on that and began typing in language to see how it would respond. And one friend of mine typed in the word feminist and got back a response that feminist, the word, was 67% toxic, So as you can imagine, there was a lot of criticism of that Perspective API for being totally biased. And to their credit, the Jigsaw team that had developed this thing worked quite hard to improve it, to remove the bias which was undoubtedly baked into it or cooked into it by those mechanical Turks, by the people who had done the coding in the first place. That experience strongly suggests that anytime an algorithm is built based on human decisions regarding a set of training data, as it's called, that algorithm is likely to be biased in one way or another. It would be very difficult to imagine that the humans on whose decisions the algorithm is based have not inadvertently, added some flavors to the soup, so to speak.
Yeah.
What is absolutely vital, in my view, is to come up with a system. This is something I'm working on quite actively now, in fact, a system to allow real transparency. Someone must be given access. Somebody from outside the companies must be given access to study how the algorithms are actually working. Of course, this has to be done under very careful circumstances so that, coming back to your question about ethical considerations, user privacy must be rigorously protected. However, the greatest ethical concern or human right that this effort is vital for protecting is, of course, freedom of expression. We are relying so heavily on the social media tools for communication, but we don't even know under what rules our behavior is being regulated. So it is an absolutely critical ethical dilemma how to protect the rights of the people who are circulating content online, and frankly also to protect the business interests of the companies, while very vigorously finally defending the rights of those of us who are using those platforms.
Did I understand right? You are working on this recently?
I'm working on a new related effort with a group of independent researchers. We are academics, we are journalists, we are civil society researchers who have come together to form a coalition to press the companies to share data for serious research in a responsible, ethical, privacy-protecting, transparent way. This is something that has just emerged in the last 3 months.
Oh, this is very important.
Well, wish us
good
luck.
Pressure group, yeah.
Wish us luck.
Yeah, I do. So let's speak a bit about the roles and the responsibilities of different actors. What do you think about the roles and responsibilities, such as actors such as civil society, governments, academia, internet intermediaries, private companies, in combating this dangerous, discriminative discourse, hate speech, blah, blah, blah. And
this is another wonderful and critical question. Until now,
protection, protection of freedom of expression, because one hand that, other is that. Yes,
absolutely.
Yes.
This is another sense in which the discussion just absolutely must be broadened to include some other figures, some other actors. Until now, policy discussions about this have focused, I would say, exclusively or almost exclusively on two kinds of actors: the companies and governments. And governments generally have tried to make constructive progress on this issue by pushing the companies. So it keeps coming back to the same small group of people, relatively small group of people who are decision makers at a relatively small handful of companies. It's important to say also that quite a lot of governments have used the widespread legitimate concern about hate speech as an excuse to crack down on companies and force them to delete content, for example, by political opponents of those governments. This is terribly widespread, and it's another enormous threat to freedom of expression. Quite a few countries have passed laws forcing the companies to take down content that is sympathetic to a group that the government doesn't like, for example. And other governments simply communicate directly with the companies, sending examples of content that they demand that the companies take down. In some cases, this is happening on a gigantic scale, and it can be quite difficult for the companies to push back against it.
Yeah.
And of course, some governments in certain circumstances just shut down a whole platform or a whole the internet entirely in some cases. So unfortunately, governments are sometimes legitimately trying to diminish hate speech and sometimes just using it as an excuse, which is a very important thing to try to guard against. There is another major kind of group that has been left out here, and that's organizations like the Hunting Foundation that are very knowledgeable, that have done a great deal of work on this topic, and that have important expertise to share. But they are very rarely consulted in the policy discussions, at least in a formal way. In my view, this is absolutely essential and should be done country by country, or as the companies would say, market by market, since that's how they think of it. They cannot really properly understand hate speech in any market unless they are wisely and carefully advised by people and organizations from civil society, academics, journalists who know that context and who understand which content is really bad and which is, let's say, merely insulting or merely distressing, to come back to something you said in the beginning, Yasmin. And then I want to mention civil society in one other respect, which is that we talk quite a bit about what the companies are doing to try to diminish the spread of hate speech on platforms. There are some very interesting initiatives by individuals and even by large groups of people to respond to hate speech online that have been largely ignored, as far as I can tell. I'm happy to say that with my colleagues at the Dangerous Speech Project over the last 3 years, we have been having a wonderful time studying those people and their initiatives. There is one group of more than 100,000 people who work collectively. And by the way, they're also operating in 12 different countries. This model it started in Sweden, and then it has been replicated from one country to another. They work collectively to respond to hate speech online. It's totally fascinating. And then we have collected quite a few other individuals who are now even just beginning to write a book on this, because it seems to have been, it seems to have kind of slipped under the radar. Of course, those people cannot cure the problem of hate speech on their own, even though there are, many, many thousands of people. This problem, as you have said, Yasmin, is so big that that won't solve it by itself. But surely those kinds of methods should not be ignored, especially since they give an opportunity for two things. One is participation. Mm-hmm. It's a kind of democratic participation, in great contrast to a mysterious, automated, top-down policy, which is what algorithmic detection and removal is. And the second reason is to come back quickly to a point that I made about whack-a-mole, the carnival game, and the fact that ultimately the only solution is to diminish the rate at which this stuff is being posted. That means changing what we academics would call discourse norms. It means convincing people that it is not acceptable to post certain sorts of content. And if that sounds too idealistic and impossible, I would remind you that within human groups of people, just about any group you can think of that you are part of, there are unspoken, unwritten rules about what you can and cannot say that people obey very, very well for the most part, because one of the characteristics of humans is that almost all of us are very keen to be members of groups, to be accepted by groups and to stay in those groups. And we stay in the groups by following their rules. one of the problems regarding hate speech online, of course, is that there are some groups that are dedicated to spreading hate speech. But the more we can reinforce norms against hate speech among the third category of people I mentioned, the people who jump on the wagon, the less hate speech will spread so widely and so virally.
Yeah, thank you. I think these were your concluding remarks. Yes. Thank you so much. But now I think our time is up. But we have half more hour for the question and answers section, and I'm sure we are going to have some questions for such a wonderful talk. I loved it. I'm sure all the participants did. And we are waiting now from the chat box.
We have a question, I think.
What is
it? Someone has sent me a question as a direct message. That's why you can't see it.
And Ali Khan, I see it.
I see one from, please forgive my awful pronunciation, Ogujan Kara.
Okay.
Says, Dear Susan, I have a short question. What is the connection between the system we live in and hate, harmful, dangerous speech? How can we stand against this? Mm-hmm. This is a tremendous question. I would just wonder, what do you mean by the system we live in? Could I ask a question back to the questioner? Do you mean political or social system, or are you talking about social media?
Either she can type or maybe open the microphone.
Well, I will make a guess in that case. And understand the system to refer to social media. And since that's the subject of our conversation today, maybe that would also be interesting for other members of the audience. So what's the connection between that system and dangerous speech? I want to, capitalist system, I see. Okay, yeah. Well, now I'm thinking again. I will answer quickly in both contexts, if I may. Regarding the capitalist system, the social media companies are making money by capturing people's attention because they sell ads. As you know, that's how they make their money. And unfortunately, hate speech and dangerous speech provoke an emotional reaction, often in people, which can make them stay online and continue to stay on whatever platform it is, Facebook, etc. So unfortunately, hate speech can be lucrative, can be a moneymaker. This is a very sad, a sad fact. Now, you asked, how can one stand against this? I mentioned already the opportunity to shift discourse norms. If you think about laws, I often say to my students, informal law is much more powerful than you might think. After all, there are formal laws against bad behavior like murder and rape, but people still do those things in spite of the law. So we must accept that we'll never be able to completely eliminate hate speech, or what I call dangerous speech. And in fact, let's face it, they have been common for all of human history. Probably most people who have ever lived have, by the way, not been born hating anybody. No baby is ever born hating anybody. But hate speech is useful to malevolent leaders because it's a good way of getting a group to cohere and to follow a leader. So many people are taught to hate or fear another group of people. I think fear is more important than hatred in any case. However, in the same way that most of us do not, thank goodness, commit murder or rape, we must reinforce norms against this kind of behavior so that the majority of people see it as unacceptable. That's a very important contribution. And then I want to say one optimistic thing. As I said, most humans have been taught to hate. That's not new. What is really new, in my view, is that a large number of people, as I mentioned, are actually working systematically against hate speech online. And an even larger number of people think it's bad. That's quite new. Just think about it. Mm-hmm. Think about what went on in almost all parts of the world only a few centuries ago, and for all the centuries before that. Massacres and genocides were all too common. Now we have a pretty big consensus against those things. And the more we can organize civil society against them and against hate speech and dangerous speech, the more we will really be doing something new in human history. Then one more optimistic thing, if I may, and then I promise I'll answer the next question. It's true that hate speech disseminates a lot online, and that there's so much of it. But I want to tell you what I think is really much more new and interesting that the internet and digital communications have done. They have made it possible for us to see and listen to the internal communications of other groups of people. Mm-hmm. For example, today and in this time in history, I see what fervent, ardent supporters of Donald Trump, including the people who thought it was fine to smash their way into the US Capitol on January 6th of this year, I can see them writing and speaking, expressing themselves to each other. It's easy, unfortunately, although it's also useful for my work. In other words, I am exposed to what those people have to say to each other. Before the internet, I would never have listened to them. I would never have read what they had to say. I didn't have access to it. So now, for good and for bad, many of us are seeing and hearing the internal speech of other human communities. That is very distressing often, but it is also a big opportunity to follow what they're doing. It should, by the way, have allowed U.S. authorities to have prevented the attack on the Capitol, since the people who planned it were openly spreading their plans online. So it gives us that opportunity, but it also gives us an opportunity to shift norms against that kind of speech. For example, among young people, we have a tremendous opportunity posed by online communication to reach out to people who are not yet fully convinced of terrible ideas and offer them alternative views in a way that would have been impossible before digital communications. So that's another very important way to, as you said, stand against this.
So, dear Susan, we have got how many more minutes left? 17 more minutes, and we have got 2 more questions. One is from Ali Kanlı. How can we interfere with hate speech in the print media, newspaper, magazine, and visual, TV, etc.? That's the first question. The other one I will tell you later if you want, after answering it. Yes.
So where that hate speech is written by journalists, surely an important opportunity is to reach the journalists. I know many media trainings around the world that seek to explain to journalists and convince them to be careful about what they write, so that they can avoid inflaming people while also not suppressing their own work in ways that might constrain their freedom of expression or that of others. There are also in quite a few countries there are agreements among media houses, among newspapers, to stick to certain rules of conduct so as to avoid hate speech. Of course, where there are owners of newspapers or governments controlling newspapers that want them to spread hate speech, then, that's a much more difficult problem.
Yeah. Some more questions coming, so we are passing to them. You said that, another question, you said that social media platforms are working on deleting the message of the person who created the hate speech before publishing it. Is it being worked on to develop a counter discourse that will make those who spread that discourse give up?
Thank you for this wonderful question. I said that I have been with my colleagues studying people who respond to hate speech. Those, we call them counter speakers. They are people who respond systematically. They have made much more progress than any of the companies have. To my knowledge, the companies have only, I know that, for example, Facebook gave some small grants to people who were experimenting with counter speech. One reason, to be fair to the companies, one reason why they don't really do much to provide an alternative or counter discourse is that they see themselves as providing, if you like, the pipes through which the water will run, and the users are the ones who are supplying the water. Maybe one exception to that would be when, for example, Twitter decided to add a little note to tweets from people I would call, bad actors or purveyors of hate speech, like Donald Trump. So they would add little comments. They have done this in some cases to correct falsehood, for example. So we could say that's something like a counter discourse or counter narrative as well.
Okay, before passing to the other question, Haluk Cem Demirhan is raising his hand. Yes, please. Mr.
Can I open my camera if that's okay? Hi. So I'm currently 12th grade, and I'm planning to apply to Harvard in regular decisions. And I wanted to ask, what are the opportunities for undergraduate students in detecting hate speech with artificial intelligence? Like, what is Harvard's approach against this?
First of all, that's very exciting. Good luck, and let me know if you come.
Yeah, sure.
It's not possible to say that Harvard has an approach, since it's a large university with many different schools within it. There's the undergraduate college, and then there are many different faculties full of professors who are studying everything from physics to philosophy, and a few of us who work there or are associated with different parts of Harvard, have our own research on it. And I would just tell you that in my view, there is nowhere near enough research on how concretely to deal with the problem of hate speech. if you're interested in it, I hope that you will make that the focus of your study, and then work on that as soon as you can.
Thank you so much.
And if I can be helpful, of course, let me know. I want to mention one more point very quickly that I didn't succeed in making. I mentioned that takedown or deleting content is only one option for responding to hate speech. And I said that ultimately the solution is to persuade people not to post it in the first place. There are other options, though. So I'd like to just quickly mention those. One is what is called downranking, especially since this is I want to mention this since it's highly relevant to AI and algorithms. Downranking is the term that the companies use for making a piece of content less visible. As you know, the algorithm is simply a word for a piece of software that does something. For example, detects particular kinds of content and categorizes it, if you like. So there are some algorithms that are meant to detect hate speech. There are other algorithms that are designed to feed users content on a particular platform. In the case of Facebook, that's called the news feed algorithm. So that algorithm looks at what I have been looking at on Facebook and then tries to feed me content that the algorithm thinks, of course it can't really think, but it is designed to feed me more content that I will want to see, and that will keep me on Facebook as long as possible so that I look at lots of ads and make lots of money for Facebook. The newsfeed algorithm is therefore also an absolutely critical newsfeed algorithm at Facebook, and the equivalent at other other platforms, other companies, is critical in the dissemination of hate speech, since it is feeding you certain content and not other content. Downranking means making content less likely to appear in news feeds. It is a very interesting alternative that can be used to suppress content without actually taking it off the platform altogether. However, it raises some really important questions, like if you downrank content so that it will only be seen by people who really, really want it or who are searching for it, will you then create a dangerous, silos in which the most toxic and motivated people will share with each other this terrible content, while the rest of us are blissfully ignorant that it's there? So downranking is a very interesting policy that also really needs to be understood and studied better. The platforms are experimenting with it a lot, I can tell you, but that's also all in the dark.
Okay. So thank you, Haluk. And another question: how can we keep social media platform accountable for fighting hate speech, but prevent that less democratic regimes use the same rhetoric to curtail freedom of speech? At the end, these companies want to keep access to these markets, so willing to cooperate with these governments.
What a wonderful, important, thoughtful question. Yes,
it is.
Well, first of all, in some cases, the companies can be helpful against those governments that are using this terrible rhetoric. And in fact, I'm sure you all have heard that one solution that has been proposed to the terribleness of social media is to break up the companies. Break Facebook into lots of little pieces. One argument against that is that companies like Facebook have become so powerful that they sometimes can resist pressure from governments. And in fact, I have tried to encourage them to do that more than they already do. So that's one possibility. Of course, they also can delete content by political figures that violates their rules. Sometimes they hesitate to do it. Donald Trump is an excellent example. After all, they only finally began to do anything about his content after the storming of the Capitol, at which point, first of all, he had already caused terrible damage, and he was only a few days from the end of his presidency. And second, there was such an enormous consensus in favor of cracking down on him that doing so didn't take any courage at all on the part of the companies. I hope that the experience with Trump has made them a little bit less cowardly. So this is one one option. And since you've asked how can we keep them accountable, we can pressure them to respond to the accounts of powerful and influential people in the same way they respond to our accounts. This is actually a big fight that I'm having with them at the moment. Several of the companies have had exceptions for influential people or for political figures so that they are less strict with those people. And in my view, it should be exactly the opposite. Those people who have tremendous capacity to do harm should be held more strictly accountable than those of us who can't incite a riot.
Yeah, I think the last, because the time is nearly up, she wrote in Turkish. Shall I don't know, pass it to the, or I can do it, saying that she's sorry because she participated, she could participate late, and maybe this question was being answered, but I missed it. This is the question from social media, especially from Twitter. If we want to make a hate speech analysis, what program for the database base would you suggest? Because it's a very big network and we cannot access to the data easily. So do you suggest any programs to this person who asked the question?
Let me just make sure I understand. Is it programs to detect hate speech?
Yes.
Or to analyze it?
Yes, analyze it. Hate speech analysis.
One of the problems, in my view, is that, well, first of all, hate speech is extremely context dependent. What is considered hate speech depends enormously on the context in which it is made or disseminated. The platforms, the companies have their own internal algorithms, AI, to detect hate speech, but they don't share those. I suppose the most widely accessible one that I can suggest to you, of course, it unfortunately operates only in English, is the Perspective API. I'll just put its name here in the chat. That was produced by Jigsaw, which is just the name of the research arm of Google.
We just talked about.
Yes, and I did discuss that. I don't know if you were already with us at that point. It still, in my view, has quite a lot of flaws, and it's another reason why I think that not only should the companies be transparent about their own tools for detecting hate speech, but we need independent researchers to to work together in a variety of languages to build such tools. They are not nearly sufficiently available.
So thank you. You know, we are so good in time management. It's 2029 in Turkey, just 1 minute to go. And I think we can end this fantastic, very informative and precious talk of yours today. Thanks so much for your contribution again, Susan.
Thank you so much. I have to say, you are the one. Also. Yes, I mean, you are the one who managed the time beautifully, and you're a fantastic moderator.
No. Thank you so much. And hope to see you face to face.
Oh my gosh.
Not in this virtual environment, but I must say, better than nothing.
I have a colleague who is going to Istanbul tomorrow.
Oh,
I'm
nice.
so tremendously jealous. Please, all of you, just eat one Turkish breakfast for me.
Of course. And we will be waiting for you also.
Yeah, I really, what a marvelous place.
Hope to see you as soon as
I hope
possible.
to see you sometime soon. Yes.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Be well.
And thanks
Enjoy
all the
rest of the year.
participants. Thank you. Hope to see you as soon as possible. Bye-bye.